On the Thursday mornings when Linda felt well enough, she sat by the window in room 14 of the Mercy General Renal Unit and watched the parking lot. It was not a scenic view. It was a parking lot. Asphalt, yellow lines, a tree near the entrance that had been doing its best for years without quite succeeding. But it was outside, and outside was a thing Linda had learned to value with the precision that only comes from being told you may have limited access to it. She had been in and out of this building for 14 months. She knew the parking lot the way she knew her own kitchen. Every section, the way the light moved across it, which spaces filled first in the morning, the silver Subaru that always parked in the same spot despite it not being assigned. She had learned, in 14 months of kidney disease, that attention is what you have when you don't have energy. She had become very attentive. She had also, in those 14 months, become very good at thinking about Carol Simmons. Not all the time. That was the version people imagined when they heard the story. The woman in the hospital, consumed by hatred for her husband's mistress. The anger sustaining her like a second illness. It wasn't like that. Most of the time, Linda thought about the things you think about when you are sick. The small logistics of getting through the day, the numbers from the last set of labs, whether she had returned her sister's call, whether Martin had remembered to pay the electric bill, or whether she'd need to remind him again. Martin was good at many things and not reliable about the electric bill. This had been true before she got sick and was still true, which she found oddly comforting, that certain things stayed themselves. But Carol Simmons was there. In the background of most days, and in the foreground of some nights, and in the particular hours of Thursday afternoons when Linda had learned, 8 months ago, from a text that had appeared on Martin's phone while he was in the shower, that Carol Simmons was the reason Martin had been unavailable on Thursdays for the better part of 2 years. She had not confronted him right away. She had been too sick to have the confrontation the discovery deserved, which was one of the particular indignities of illness, that it interferes with the timing of everything else, that it removes your ability to respond to things in the moment they happen, because the moment they happen, you are usually managing something more immediate than emotional justice. She had waited. She had gathered her strength, which came in limited quantities, for the things that most required it. She had thought, on Thursdays and sometimes other days, about what she would say to Carol Simmons if she ever had the chance. She had rehearsed it. Not out loud. She was not the kind of woman who rehearsed things out loud, but in the particular interior theater of the long hospitalized, where you have more time for internal rehearsal than is probably healthy. She had versions. She had a version that was cold and precise. She had a version that was simply the truth, stated plainly. She had a version that she never fully completed, because it started with something that made her cry, and she was trying to conserve her energy for things more essential than crying. She had not imagined a version that started the way Tuesday morning started. She was sitting by the window, watching a woman in a blue coat try to read the parking signs, when Dr. Reeves came in with a resident she didn't recognize, and a look on his face that was different from his usual look. Dr. Reeves had a usual look. After 14 months, she knew it. It was the look of a man who was managing multiple complex situations simultaneously, and who had learned to convey information efficiently and without wasting either party's time on excess feeling. She trusted him. She trusted him specifically because he didn't perform optimism. The look he had this morning was not his usual look. "Linda," he said, "I have news." She put down the cup of water she had been holding. "Good or complicated?" "Both," he said. "There's a potential donor match." She had been on the transplant list for 9 months. She understood the statistical landscape of that list. She had researched it the way she researched things, which was thoroughly and without flinching. And she understood that a match in 9 months was not slow and not fast, and that the word potential was doing significant work in that sentence. "Who?" she said. Not because the who changed whether she wanted the kidney, but because she was attentive. Dr. Reeves glanced at the resident. A small glance, a checking glance that Linda caught. "The donor is a living donor," he said. "Someone who reached out to our transplant coordinator directly. The initial compatibility testing is very promising." He paused. "Her name is Carol Simmons." Linda looked at him. The parking lot was still there outside the window. The woman in the blue coat had found her spot. A delivery truck was backing up to the hospital's side entrance. The tree near the exit was doing its best. "I'm going to need a minute," Linda said. "Of course," Dr. Reeves said. He left. The resident followed. The door clicked shut with the specific soft sound of hospital doors, which are designed not to startle. Linda sat with the water cup in her hands and looked at the parking lot. She thought, "This is not one of the versions I rehearsed." Martin Kowalski had been Linda's husband for 19 years. He was a project manager for a construction company, reliable in most ways, funny in the specific manner of men who are serious by nature and have developed humor as a counterweight. He was the person Linda called first when something happened, good or bad, and he was usually the right person to call. He had sat with her through 14 months of this, with a consistency she had not taken for granted even when she had been angry at him, because the two things coexisted. She was angry at him, and she recognized that he was sitting there. Humans contain that kind of complication. She had learned to let both be true. She had confronted him about Carol 4 months ago, not because she had gathered enough strength finally, but because one morning she had woken up and thought, "I might not have that many more mornings, and I am not spending them knowing something that Martin doesn't know I know." The conversation had been long and terrible and honest in the way that conversations are when both people have decided to stop managing the other person's comfort. Martin had cried. She had not. She had used her allotted crying for that week on something else earlier and had run out. He had told her the shape of it. 2 years, Thursdays, a woman named Carol who worked in the building next to his office. He had told her it was over, which was either true or the thing you say, and Linda had not decided which. And it had not been her most pressing concern, because her most pressing concern was the failing kidney. She had not asked him much about Carol. She knew what Carol did for a living, which was teach second grade at an elementary school in Westchester. She knew Carol had a daughter from a previous marriage who was 11. She knew Carol had brown hair, from the picture she had seen on a quick look at a social media profile, before she'd closed the browser and decided not to look further, because looking further was not going to help her get through the next dialysis session. She did not know Carol was type O negative. She did not know Carol had gone to the transplant coordinator 6 weeks ago, before Linda even knew about the match possibility, and volunteered. She sat with that for a long time. She sat with the parking lot and the silver Subaru and the tree and the water cup. She thought about all the versions of Carol Simmons she had constructed in 14 months of Thursdays. She thought about the version that was cold and precise, and the version that was the truth stated plainly, and the version she couldn't finish. None of those versions contained this. She picked up her phone and called Martin. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, how are you feeling this? Did you know about Carol?" she said. Silence. "Martin." "She told me she was going to reach out," he said. "I didn't know if she actually would. I didn't know how to tell you she was going to." "You didn't know how to tell me." "I know." His voice had the sound of someone who knows exactly how inadequate what they're saying is, and is saying it anyway, because there's nothing better available. "I know, Linda." She was quiet for a moment. "I need you to come here." "I'm leaving now," he said. "Before we go any further with Linda, because what happens next is the part of this story that I don't think you're going to be prepared for, even knowing it's coming. I want to take a moment with you.
Okay.
If you're watching this, you already know this isn't a simple story. It's not supposed to be. Please subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't already. YouTube doesn't reach every subscriber with every video, and this is exactly the kind of story I don't want you to miss the continuation of. Hit like if something in you is already tangled up, trying to figure out how you'd feel in Linda's place. And leave me a comment. I want to know what you're thinking right now, before you know how it ends. I also want to say, honestly, channels like this one don't run on their own. If you'd like to support what we're building here, stories told with real care, real time, real attention, there's something in the description and the pinned comment that's worth a look. Every person who supports us makes it possible to keep going. Now, Martin was on his way, and Carol Simmons was somewhere in this building. Martin arrived in 40 minutes, which was faster than traffic should have allowed. He came in wearing his work jacket, which meant he had left directly from the office without stopping, which was the kind of thing Linda noticed. He sat in the chair next to the bed, the specific chair that had become his chair over 14 months, the one with the slightly uneven leg that nobody had fixed, and looked at her. "Tell me what you know," he said. She told him what Dr. Reeves had told her. Martin listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always valued about him, the ability to actually listen when something mattered. When she finished, he said, "I didn't ask her to do this. I know you didn't. She made this decision entirely on her own. I found out 6 weeks ago and He stopped. "I should have told you immediately. I'm sorry I didn't." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't know if she'd actually go through with it. And because I didn't know how you'd react. And because..." He stopped again. "Because I was afraid that if I told you, and you refused the kidney, I would have cost you the only match we'd found in 9 months, and I was afraid of having done that." Linda looked at him. He was not wrong that the calculation existed. He was not right to have made it for her. "We'll talk about that part later," she said. "Right now, I want to understand what I'm deciding." "What are you deciding?" "Whether I can accept this." Martin was quiet. He understood that this was not a question he got to answer. Dr. Reeves came back at 2 in the afternoon, this time without the resident. He sat in the other chair, the straight-backed one near the window, not Martin's chair, and explained the medical situation with his usual efficiency. The compatibility was strong. The donor was healthy. The surgical risk on both sides was within acceptable parameters. If Linda agreed to proceed, and if Carol confirmed, which doctor? Reeves said Carol had made clear she was prepared to do. The surgery could be scheduled within 3 weeks. "I need to ask you something," Linda said. "Of course." "Why is she doing this?" Dr. Reeves looked at her. "You'd have to ask her that." "Does she know that I know who she is?" The coordinator was careful about what information was shared. "I don't know exactly what she's aware of." A pause. "But I suspect she's aware that you likely know." Linda was quiet. "Can you tell her I want to meet with her?" Dr. Reeves looked at her for a moment. "That's not standard protocol." "I know." A pause. "Can you tell her anyway?" He stood. "I'll pass along the request." Carol Simmons knocked on the door of room 14 on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. She was shorter than Linda had imagined. This was the first thing Linda registered. Not her face, not her expression, just the fact of her height, which was several inches less than the height Linda had constructed in 2 years of thinking about her. She had brown hair, as the social media profile had indicated, cut to her shoulders. She was wearing jeans and a green sweater, and she was carrying a paper coffee cup from the hospital's first-floor cafe, which she was holding with both hands in the way that people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. She stopped in the doorway. Linda was sitting in the bed. Martin had gone to get lunch. She had asked him to, because she needed to do this part without him in the room, and he had understood that and gone without discussion, which was one of the things she had always valued about Martin, and which was a separate category of feeling from everything else. The two women looked at each other. Carol said, "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I wasn't sure I did," Linda said. "Sit down." Carol sat in the straight-back chair, the one near the window. She held the coffee cup in her lap. She did not say anything immediately, which Linda noted and which she was inclined to interpret as respect rather than strategy, though she was aware she might be wrong about that. "I need you to tell me why," Linda said. Carol looked at her. "Why I'm doing this." "Yes." Carol was quiet for a moment. Linda watched her and tried to read what was in the quiet. Not evasion, she thought, but the actual search for the honest answer, which was different. "I found out 6 months ago what was happening to you," Carol said. "Martin told me." She paused. "We had already stopped. That part was done. But he told me about your diagnosis, and She stopped, started again. "I'm type O negative. I've known that my whole life. I've known what it means for donation. I've thought about donation before. I'm registered. I've been registered since college." She looked at her coffee cup. "When I found out what was happening with you, what it meant, what the list looked like, I went home and I sat with it and I thought I could do something. And then I thought about whether I should, whether it was presumptuous, whether you would even want it." She paused. "And I kept coming back to the fact that I have something you need, and I'm not using it, and I'm not a person who can sit on that." Linda was quiet. "I'm not doing this for Martin," Carol said. "I want you to know that. I'm not doing it because I feel guilty either. I mean, I do feel guilty. I'm not going to pretend that's not part of my interior landscape, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because you're a person who is sick, and I can help. And I have decided that those two facts are more important than the other facts." She looked up. "That's the whole of it. I don't have a better answer than that." Linda looked at her for a long time. "That's a good answer," she said finally. Carol looked slightly startled, as if she had been braced for something else, and the ground had shifted. "I have more questions," Linda said. "Okay. Did you love him?" Carol was still for a moment. "I thought I did," she said carefully. "I think that what I felt was real. But I think I was making choices that I knew weren't right, and I was very good at not thinking about that." She paused. "I thought about you, though, more than I let myself know I was thinking. That's also real." "Did he tell you about me? What I was like?" "Some. Carol stopped. "He talked about you the way people talk about people they love and are failing, which is not straightforwardly, which doesn't tell you very much that's useful." "No," Linda said. "It doesn't." They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the parking lot was doing its Thursday morning thing. The silver Subaru was in its usual spot. The tree near the entrance was doing its best. "Can I ask you something?" Carol said. "Go ahead." "What are you going to decide?" Linda looked at her. "I don't know yet." A pause. "I needed to see you first. I needed to see if you were the person I'd made up or a different person." "Which am I?" Linda considered. "Different," she said. "Not entirely different, but different enough." Carol nodded. She looked out the window for a moment, then back at Linda. "Whatever you decide," she said, "I want you to know that the offer doesn't go away. I'll be here when you're ready." She stood. She picked up the coffee cup. She stood in the room for a moment, as if she might say something else, and then she didn't. And she went. The door made its soft hospital sound. Linda sat with the parking lot and thought. She thought for 3 days. Not uninterruptedly. She slept, she had labs, she had the regular machinery of being a patient in a renal unit, which does not pause for existential deliberation. But in the spaces between, she thought. Martin came every day. They talked about other things mostly. Clara, his daughter from his first marriage, who was coming to visit on the weekend, the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom that had been leaking since September, a book Linda had been trying to finish for 4 months and kept losing the thread of because concentration required energy she didn't always have. They talked around the center of things the way you talk around something when you both know it's there and you've agreed, without saying so, that you'll get to it when you get to it. On the second evening, Martin said, "You don't have to decide anything because of me." "I know," Linda said. "I mean that in both directions," he said. "You don't have to accept it because of me, and you don't have to refuse it because of me." She looked at him. "That's a very careful thing to say." "I'm trying to be careful," he said. "I haven't always been." She looked at him for a long moment. He was 51 years old, and he had the particular look of a man who has spent 14 months watching his wife be sick, while also carrying the weight of what he'd done and what it meant and what he owed. And all of those things were visible on his face in the particular way that things are visible on the faces of people who aren't trying to hide them anymore. "I know you're trying," she said. "Is that enough?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's also a question I'm thinking about." He nodded. He understood that this was not a bad answer. It was just a true one. The thing she kept returning to, in the spaces between, was not the question of whether to accept the kidney. That question, when she held it plainly, had a clear answer. She was sick. The match was good. The alternative to accepting the kidney was continuing to decline, which she had been doing for 14 months. And the trajectory of that decline was not a thing she allowed herself to look at directly, but that she was aware of in the peripheral vision of her days. She needed the kidney. The question she kept returning to was what it meant to need it from Carol. She had rehearsed, for 2 years, a version of Carol Simmons that was coherent and navigable. A person who could be blamed, at whom the full weight of Linda's anger had a legitimate address. The anger had been real. She was not going to revise that, pretend it hadn't existed, clean it up for the purposes of this particular story. She had been angry. She was still angry. Anger doesn't evacuate because the person you're angry at does something unexpected. It doesn't work that way. But the anger existed alongside something else now. Something that didn't have a clean name, not gratitude, not exactly, because gratitude felt too simple, felt like it skipped over the complexity to get to the tidy emotion. Something more like the recognition that Carol Simmons was a person with dimensions she hadn't been allowed, in Linda's mental rendering, to have. Carol had said, "I'm not a person who can sit on that." She had said it with the plain quality of someone describing a fact about themselves. And Linda had believed her. Not because she had decided to trust Carol, but because she recognized the quality of the statement. She had said things like that herself. "I'm not a person who can let that go. I'm not a person who doesn't finish what she starts." The grammar of self-knowledge. She thought about Carol's daughter, 11 years old, who would have a mother who came home from surgery missing a kidney and would have to be told something about why. She thought about the version of this that Carol could have chosen, to know about Linda's illness and do nothing, to recede into the private geography of a relationship that was over, to let the distance accumulate, to go about the ordinary business of her life with the 11-year-old and a teaching job, and whatever came next. Carol had not done that. On the third day, Linda asked the nurse to send a message to Dr. Reeves. When he came by at 3 o'clock, she told him she wanted to proceed. "I'll let the coordinator know," he said. I'll have Carol's team contact her to confirm.
We're having the team contact.
Can you tell her?
Everything.
Linda stopped. Tell her what? Tell her thank you, Linda said. Tell her I said thank you. Dr. Reeves looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not his usual expression. Then he said, I'll tell her. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, several things happened.
You're doing so well.
Martin and Linda had the conversation they had been circling since the confrontation 4 months ago. The real one, not the version where they were both managing each other. It was long and uncomfortable, and there were parts of it that Linda was not sure they would recover from, and parts that she thought, sitting with afterward, might be the foundation of something different from what they'd had before. She didn't know yet. She had decided she didn't have to know yet. She had decided that deciding everything in advance of the evidence was a habit she was trying to break. Her sister Rachel drove down from Connecticut and stayed for the week before the surgery. Rachel was 4 years older than Linda and had always been the louder of the two, the one who filled rooms and organized things and said what she thought before she'd finished thinking it. In the past, this had occasionally driven Linda to distraction. During that week, it was exactly what she needed. Someone who took up space without asking permission, who brought noise and motion and the ordinary chaos of a person fully engaged with being alive. On the Friday before the surgery, Rachel said, Tell me about the woman. What about her? What's she like? Linda thought about the green sweater and the coffee cup and the way Carol had held it with both hands. She thought about, I'm not a person who can sit on that. She thought about the answer to whether she'd loved Martin. I thought I did. The honesty of that. Not the clean answer, but the worked-out answer. Complicated, Linda said. Complicated how? In the way that people are complicated when you've decided who they are in advance, and then you meet them. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Do you hate her? Linda considered. I'm not sure anymore, she said. I think I hate what happened. I think those are supposed to be different things, and I'm still working out how different they are in practice. That's very evolved of you, Rachel said. I'm working on it, Linda said. Don't give me credit yet. Rachel smiled. Too late. The surgery took 6.5 hours. Linda was under for all of it, which she appreciated. Surgery is one of the places where unconsciousness is not a problem, but a feature. She came out of it in the recovery room with the particular blunt quality of post-anesthesia awareness. The lights were very bright. Something was beeping in a measured and non-alarming way. There was Martin holding her hand, and there was the knowledge, immediate and physical and not yet fully processed, that something had changed inside her. The first person she asked about when she was awake enough to ask was Carol. She's in recovery, the nurse said. She came through well. Her family is with her. Her family. Linda thought about the 11-year-old, who would be old enough to understand something of what had happened, and young enough that understanding it might take years. Good, Linda said, and meant it, which surprised her. Not that she meant it, but the uncomplicated way in which she meant it, without qualification, without the complicated texture she would have expected to be there. She slept. She woke. Martin was still there, having been joined at some point by Rachel, who was drinking terrible hospital coffee and reading something on her phone with the expression of a woman who has decided that waiting requires occupation. The ordinary traffic of being loved. The recovery was long. Transplant recovery is always long. The body adjusting to the new presence inside it, the medications, the monitoring, the patience required of every cell to accept what has been given. Linda had been told to expect weeks of recovery, and she experienced weeks of recovery. And it was exactly as unromantic and effortful as the doctors had described. She did not see Carol again during the hospital stay. Carol was in a different wing, recovering from the donor surgery, which carries its own timeline and its own demands. They were in the same building for 4 days, and then Carol went home, and Linda stayed another week, and then Linda went home too. She thought about writing to Carol. She thought about it the way she'd thought about other things, carefully, without rushing it, with the awareness that the wrong version of the gesture was worse than no gesture. She wrote the letter 2 months after the surgery. By then, her numbers were good. Better than good. Better than they had been in over a year. The particular quality of better that makes doctors use words they are usually careful with. Words like encouraging and trajectory, and the phrase remarkable recovery, which Dr. Reeves said with the restraint of a man who has been wrong about remarkable before and intends to remain appropriately cautious. She was sitting in the kitchen on a Saturday morning with the early spring light coming through the window, which was a thing she had missed without entirely knowing how much until she was back in it. She had a cup of coffee. She had her own kitchen. She had, inside her, a kidney that belonged to Carol Simmons. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant to carry something that came from another person. Not abstractly, but physically, actually. The daily reality of a body that now contained something it hadn't before. She thought about the green sweater and the coffee cup, and I'm not a person who can sit on that. She wrote the letter by hand. 2 pages, because she had tried shorter, and it hadn't been enough, and she had tried longer, and it had said too much. 2 pages was the honest length. She did not say forgiveness, not because it wasn't true, but because it was a word that felt too finished, too resolved, too much like a period at the end of something that was more like an ellipsis. She said instead that she was grateful, and that grateful was complicated, and that she had decided complicated was okay. She said that she thought about Carol every day, that this was strange and also not strange, that she had stopped being sure it was something to resist. She said that she hoped Carol's daughter was well, that she hoped Carol was well, that she hoped the missing kidney was not troubling her, which was a medical reality she had read about and taken seriously. She said, near the end, "I don't know what category to put you in. I have thought about it, and I don't think there is a category. I think you are just a person who did something that I am still understanding. I am still understanding it. I think that is going to be true for a long time, and I have decided that is okay too." She sealed the letter. She addressed it. She took it to the mailbox herself, which required walking to the end of the driveway, which was a thing she could do now. She stood at the mailbox for a moment after she put the letter in. The morning was cool and bright. There were birds in the neighbor's birch tree. A car went by on the street, and then another, and the day had its ordinary forward motion, which was the thing Linda had learned to notice, and which she was still learning to take for granted in the right way, the way you take for granted the things that are reliably there. She walked back to the house. The front steps, the door, the kitchen where the coffee was still warm. She had a kidney that worked. She had a husband who was trying. She had a sister who called too often, and a doctor who used the word encouraging, and a body that was doing what she had asked it to do for 14 months, which was hold on. She sat at the kitchen table and finished her coffee. She thought briefly about the parking lot at Mercy General, the silver Subaru, the tree near the entrance doing its best, the parking lot that had been the view from the window in room 14. She thought about all the Thursdays she had sat there and constructed versions of Carol Simmons that were navigable and blaming and complete. None of those versions had contained this. This could not have been constructed in advance. It had to happen the way it happened. The knock on the door, the green sweater, the coffee cup. I'm not a person who can sit on that. You can't plan for grace. It arrives the way it arrives. The work is in what you do when it does. Linda finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup. She went to the living room, where the book she had been trying to finish for 5 months was on the side table. She picked it up. She found her place. She read. Some stories end with everything resolved. This one doesn't, because life doesn't. Linda and Martin are still married. It is a different marriage than the one they had. Harder in some ways, more honest in most. The kind of thing that happens when two people go through something together and separately, and come out the other side, not sure what they are to each other, but committed to finding out. Carol Simmons is teaching second grade in Westchester. Her kidney function has remained normal. Her daughter is 12 now. They have not become friends, Linda and Carol. They are not in each other's lives in the ordinary sense, but they are connected in a way that doesn't have a name, connected by something that is inside Linda's body and that changes what it means to be a stranger to someone, that changes what it means to say another person's name. Linda thinks about that sometimes, about what it means to carry something that came from a complicated place and to have it become simply part of you, ordinary, daily, doing its work. She thinks it's not so different from everything else she carries. If this story moved you, and I believe it did, because it moves me every time I think about it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who believes that grace has to be earned, or that forgiveness is a thing you decide once and then have. Share it with someone who is working on something complicated and needs to know that working on it is enough. Leave me a comment telling me where you felt it the hardest. Was it the knock on the door? Was it, I'm not a person who can sit on that? Was it the letter, I want to know? These things matter. Subscribe and hit the bell. You know why. Because I want to keep bringing you stories like Linda's. Stories where the moral is complicated and the people are real, and the ending doesn't have a bow. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying with Linda through all of it. She would have wanted you to know that she finished the book, finally. 5 months. Turned out to be worth it. Take good care. Until next time.